It is Friday. We've made it. October 11th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And like a giddy Moshe Wanunu. I like it.
It's a Friday. It's Friday Moshe here, Jill, on the pod.
I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. And for some of you, it's going to be a 3-day weekend. Monday is Columbus Day / Indigenous Peoples Day, depending on where you live.
According to my Apple calendar, it's both. Apple has it as both Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day.
Right. Depending on where you live, it might have been renamed. It might not have been renamed, etc. For a variety of reasons, right? Columbus comes from Europe, here. But some people say he shouldn't be the one who's recognized on this day. It should be the people who are already living here on this day. We're not going to enter that debate, Jill. But I will wish you a meaningful Yom Kippur, which begins this evening. Jews will be fasting. Well, some Jews, not all the Jews. Some Jews will be fasting for 24 hours starting at sunset tonight.
I fast for like 22 hours.
You can't make it. The last couple are tough.
I do it on the later end of the sunset on the first night. And then like as soon as it remotely gets dark, I do it on the next day. So
for those of you unfamiliar, Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement for Jews, and among the traditions is you're atoning for your sins annually. No food, no water, prayer, reflection for all the sins you've committed in the previous year, and a praying to God that He will clear you in the book of life in the coming year as you seek forgiveness. So, but memorable for many Jews is the fasting experience
and the breaking of the fast, which we'll talk about in what we're watching, reading, and eating.
Yes. After 25 hours, we've both learned lessons on what to eat and how much to eat after not eating for 25 hours.
All right, let's get to the headlines. The aftermath of Hurricane Milton, devastation in Florida, but the storm was not the worst case scenario that many had predicted. Meanwhile, the person who oversees response and recovery for FEMA talks to Mo News.
Yeah, talking about their response to the hurricanes and some of the various theories that have been going around about FEMA in recent weeks.
An update on a story we told you about earlier this week, the Afghan man accused of plotting a terror attack on Election Day. Well, it turns out that he worked as a CIA guard in Afghanistan. That's according to some new information. To politics, a new poll shows Republicans appear poised to take control of the Senate. We'll talk about some of the races to watch.
Yeah, this is going to be an uphill climb for Democrats, and there's concern now that And so now some are saying, let's turn our attention to the U.S. House, where many Democrats believe they still have a chance of winning a majority.
Many analysts think that the path to victory for either party runs through Long Island, where I live.
You would say that, Jill.
I would, and I would be correct. The country remembers the Kennedy family matriarch, Ethel Kennedy, who died at the age of 96.
11 kids, 34 grandchildren.
And tennis great Rafael Nadal says he is retiring from professional tennis. Just as the networks are cutting back on late night, Netflix picks up a new live talk show. Who's the host?
One of my faves.
Plus, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend, what we are watching, reading, and eating.
And what we're not eating, or how long we're not eating for. Also part of this special edition.
All right, let's start with Hurricane Milton, which is now a tropical storm spinning out over the Atlantic, but not, of course, before plowing across Florida, where it knocked out power to more than 3 million people and whipped up a barrage of tornadoes. At this point, we know the storm has caused at least 12 deaths, 6 alone from the tornadoes that were spawned by the storm. In the final hours, though, before landfall, the storm tracked slightly south, sparing the highly populated city of Tampa the worst case scenario. So this storm made landfall as a Cat 3 storm in Siesta Key. It's about 70 miles south of Tampa. Here is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis briefing reporters on Thursday. He said the storm left a trail of destruction across Florida, but expressed some relief that the storm had tracked south.
What we can say is the storm was significant, but thankfully this was not the worst case scenario. The storm did weaken before landfall, and the storm surge, as initially reported, has not been as significant overall as what was observed for Hurricane Helene. Right now, it looks like Sarasota County had the most significant storm surge, likely somewhere between 8 to 10 feet. And remember, with Helene, we had 15 to 20 feet up in Taylor County.
But Moshe, let's not downplay the impact here. 8 to 10 feet of storm surge in Sarasota County is quite serious. DeSantis said the storm also dumped up to 18 inches of rain in some areas. So that is a 1 in 1,000-year rainfall event for the area.
Yeah, at one point, as I was watching coverage there on Wednesday night, Jill, the city of St. Pete got about 6 inches of rain in an hour. Just a remarkable amount of rain there.
The wind from the storm ripped off huge sections of the roof at Tropicana Field, which is the Rays' home ballpark. The wind gusts were up to 100 miles per hour. The state had actually designated Tropicana Field as a staging area for emergency management services. The staging area, though, had already been relocated by the time the storm hit. So there were no first responders that were actually on site when the storm hit. The ballpark not used as a shelter. Moshe, you just spoke to an official from FEMA. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Keith Turry spoke to us. He's been there nearly 2 decades, experienced FEMA response and recovery senior official. He's been there through President Bush, through President Obama, through President Trump, through President Biden. And that's something we talked about because there's been a lot of accusations out there like, well, does FEMA play politics here? And he's like, listen, I've been here through Republicans and Democrats. We just are here to help fellow Americans, irregardless of politics. We talked about the response, especially the 1-2 punch here in less than 2 weeks of Helene and Milton. He says it is similar to some previous years he's worked with FEMA. 2017 and 2020 in particular were years where there were multiple hurricanes making landfall around this time of year, though this is later than typical. Usually it's late August, early September there. He did talk about how they pre-positioned assets. They had a pretty good forecast in both cases, though I did ask about Western North Carolina and lessons learned there, given how difficult things have been there. And he said, listen, things are difficult in Western North Carolina on a good day with single road access. And ultimately, we talked about how also roads are built along rivers in that part of the country. So, of course, when rivers flood, they take out the roads next to them, and then it's very hard to gain access. So he does say that FEMA will have some lessons learned here when it comes to dealing with sort of these hard to get to parts of the country moving forward. I also asked him about the communication challenge this day and age with various theories being circulated very quickly on social media. You know, we've been talking about them on the podcast, people's theories that the government controls hurricanes, which I actually asked him. I'm like, listen, what control do you have over hurricanes? And he goes, if we could control them, we would stop them. We cannot control them, sadly. But he talked about how it has been a challenge in recent years here, going back to the East Palestine disaster in Ohio, what happened in Maui out of the fires there, that they are dealing with increases with an increased amount of misinformation and some of the lessons there. Take a listen. You've been there for a while. This feels new in terms of the pushback, the theories, et cetera, that you've been experiencing. Are there lessons you feel that FEMA's learned from at least the past couple months here in terms of how to best communicate to folks in sort of the social media era as some of these theories take root very quickly?
Yeah, I think so. We've seen some of this type of information, not just in this disaster. We had some of this happen back in Hawaii when we were dealing with the fires in Hawaii, and also when we were supporting tangentially some of the train derailment in Ohio, which we did help a little bit of coordination. There was some misinformation that happened there. What happened here in these hurricanes was a different level of that. I think we're recognizing that obviously that's something that's here to stay, unfortunately. And so we have to really work ahead on getting that message out proactively, making sure that we communicate what it is we do, what our role is, what folks can expect from us. The one thing I will say, though, that's been very positive is we've had lots of partners that have come forward over the last number of weeks and been able to support the position of what we do and what we don't do, support the facts about the responses that we've been able to execute, because it is a team effort. The one thing that you know about emergency management, FEMA, it gets the headlines, but it is a team effort. We bring together almost every federal agency will come in some shape or form. They'll be supporting the states, build lots of capacity. Florida has immense capacity to respond to hurricanes, and they're demonstrating that right now. And then the local governments. So it's a team effort. It's holistic in how we respond, and we've seen great support from many of our partners in helping get that information out. So it's something we're going to have to continue to deal with. Unfortunately, we're not letting it distract us from responding and helping those that need it. But we'll keep looking at the most effective way to communicate as we move forward.
We also talked about money, Jill. The headline out this week that FEMA, just less than 2 weeks into the fiscal year for the government, has already spent about half of their disaster allocation. They were given $20 billion starting on October 1st, and they've already spent about $9 billion of that. I'm like, how can that be? And he said, listen, you got to go back to last year. We were over budget due to disasters last year. And so we had to pause $8 billion in spending last year. And this goes back to recovery efforts from previous disasters. We're talking about flooding in Vermont a couple years ago and a whole bunch of recovery projects and rebuilding projects they're engaged in from going back to 2017. So he said that money was paused. So when the new money came in, that money was initially allocated. So as far as having money to deal with these disasters, he's like, we're fine. We can handle Milton. We can handle Helene. It's potentially going into next year where we might have trouble. And that's where he says they may be going to Congress for more here. House Democrats are already calling on Speaker Johnson, the Republican House Speaker, to immediately reconvene FEMA to pass more money. But again, FEMA says they don't immediately need money here. One thing we also got into in the conversation, Jill, the whole spending program they have at FEMA, separate division of FEMA, not related to disaster, related to what's called the SSP program, which spends several $100 million a year for migrants coming to the country, helping local authorities, state authorities with that. He said, listen, that's a congressionally authorized program passed by Republicans and Democrats to help locals around the country. Rest assured that is specific money allocated and authorized by Congress for that program. It has nothing to do with disaster money. I deal with disaster money. We're okay right now. If we need to go back, we'll go back. And Jill, I'll add one more note here. While FEMA is the bold-faced name here, and everyone says FEMA this, FEMA that, a reminder, and he reminded me in this interview, which we'll have out on the Mo News interview podcast, that FEMA isn't in charge of everything, especially when it comes to first responders. That they're a coordinating agency. They coordinate between locals, first responders, states, volunteer groups, the feds. They handle a lot of coordination. So as far as people's accusations that FEMA was stopping me from going down a road, FEMA was taking away things from me, he's like, that's not even our role. So ultimately here, that probably was a local or state authority ensuring you were going to be safe going down a certain road or flying a certain direction. And so ultimately here, just sort of a reset on expectations when it comes to FEMA, their role here. And so I think if anyone is curious about disaster recovery in the country, the state of things, take a listen to today's latest Mo News interview podcast.
All right, time for the speed read from NBC News. An Afghan man arrested on charges of planning a terrorist attack on Election Day worked as a security guard in Afghanistan for the CIA. That is according to two sources who spoke to NBC News. 27-year-old Nasir Ahmed Tawhidi was arrested on Monday in Oklahoma. He is accused of plotting to kill Americans with an assault rifle on behalf of ISIS. According to court documents, he indicated in seized communications that he planned his attack for Election Day, November 5th. Authorities said that in an interview after his arrest, he confirmed that the attack was intended to target large gatherings and that he expected to die a martyr. Authorities say he planned the operation with a juvenile co-conspirator described as an Afghan citizen with legal permanent resident status. The pair were arrested after they met an undercover FBI agent who posed as a business partner to buy the rifles, 10 magazines, and ammunition for that planned attack. Court documents say that he had contributed to an ISIS charity in March and accessed online ISIS propaganda, but they didn't say whether he was radicalized before or after he came to the United States in 2021. One senior administration official said counterterrorism officials assess that Tawhidi became radicalized during the 3 years that he lived here in the U.S. Other sources say they are still investigating. What we do know is that court documents say that he entered the country in September of 2021. That's about a month after the U.S. military completed its very chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan after 20 years of war. An official saying every Afghan resettled in the U.S. undergoes a rigorous screening and vetting process, no matter which agency they worked with. That process includes checking against a full range of U.S. records and holdings.
So we're still trying to get to the bottom of this, or I should say the government is trying to get to the bottom of this. One official says that Tweedy actually passed 2 rounds of vetting here. And in those rounds of vetting, they say no, quote, derogatory information was detected. He was first screened before he entered the U.S. On what is known as humanitarian parole back in September of 2021. And then he was vetted again while living in Oklahoma City when he applied for a special immigrant visa, which he was eligible for because he worked for the U.S. government, as you mentioned. He was approved for the visa. It was given to Afghans after they passed a screening from the Department of Homeland Security. There is a debate between U.S. officials about the charging document, whether he officially entered on humanitarian parole as opposed to special immigrant visa or vice versa. So we'll wait to hear more there. Members of Congress and other U.S. officials have said that as the U.S. evacuated tens of thousands of Afghans in those waning days of the war then in August and September of 2021, concerns emerged that not all of them were properly scrutinized. But again, it does appear here that he did go through an interview process both there and here. So we'll await more details here and whether this is going to change how the government looks at everyone else who came in through that process for added scrutiny.
Now to politics from the New York Times. Control of the Senate appears likely to flip from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party this fall, as one of the nation's most endangered Democrats, Senator Jon Tester of Montana, trails his Republican challenger in his bid for re-election. This is according to a new poll from the New York Times and Siena College. So Tester first won election to the Senate back in 2006. He is winning over moderate and independent voters, and he is running far ahead of the Democrat at the top of the ticket, Vice President Kamala Harris. But as of now, that does not appear to be enough to survive in Montana, a conservative state where former President Trump is ahead by 17 percentage points and where control of the Senate could hang in the balance. His opponent is Tim Sheehy, a wealthy Republican businessman and a former Navy SEAL. He has never held public office. According to the poll, he leads Tester 52% to 44%. Democrats currently hold a 51-seat Senate majority. But Republicans are already set to pick up a seat after the retirement of Senator Joe Manchin. He caucused with Democrats, and the party now cannot afford to lose any more seats.
Yeah, so they got 51 seats, going down to 50, which means it's 50-50, which means they already, if nothing else changes, and they're able to hold everything else, still 50-50, which means they need a Democratic White House. The Democratic vice president can break ties like Kamala Harris had to do for a bit there. But it's a hard year for Democrats. They're defending a lot of territory. Tester is looking to pull a rabbit out of a hat there in a very Republican state, but sort of like Joe Manchin in West Virginia has been able to defy that as a moderate Democrat in Montana. So they still have hopes they can hold that. But increasingly, they're looking down to Texas for a pickup opportunity to be able to hold a semblance of a majority there. That's where Ted Cruz is on the defense. There's a Democrat named Colin Allred who's running against him, he's competitive, but still slightly trailing Ted Cruz there in Texas. Democrats are also on the defense in places like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin. Just a tough year for them. Remember, senators serve 6-year terms, so every 2 years, about a third of the Senate is up here. And this is a year where, again, Democrats tend to have more seats that they have to defend here. So what does this mean? Well, they've been trying to say it's competitive for a while. Experts will look at it and saying, well, this is never going to be a good year for Democrats in the Senate. Let's shift all our resources to the U.S. House, which is really a 50-50 situation there. But Democrats have been saying, no, let's keep pumping money into Montana, Ohio, these states. We got to preserve some semblance of a majority there. But Democrats are looking to the House saying, if we're going to lose the Senate, maybe our chances of holding some part of Congress, so it's not all Republican, is in the U.S. House, where Republicans have a very slim situation. And Jill, you mentioned a number of those key seats that went red 2 years ago. Democrats are hoping to turn blue out there on Long Island.
Right. There was a lot of hype around a red wave for the midterm elections. And the only place that actually happened was on Long Island, where of the 4 congressional districts, all 4 went red, went for Republicans.
Yeah, effectively, the reason Republicans have the House and Speaker Mike Johnson is the Speaker is because of what happened in New York.
Infamously, George Santos was one of those Republicans. We know he got the boot. And then there was a special election. A Democrat, Tom Suozzi, won his seat. He's expected to keep that. But a couple of the other races could be close. You know, one of them not really expected to be close. The Republicans expected to hold it. But a couple of the other ones could potentially flip. So we'll see.
It's really tough to figure out this far out. A reminder, the U.S. House has 435 seats. About 50 of them are competitive. The other 400 or so, just under 400 of them, not so competitive, very blue and very red. So we're watching about 50 seats very closely. You know, you're talking about congressional districts, so about 600,000 people live in each one. It's actually very expensive to poll congressional districts, so House members don't typically poll, so it's very hard to get a gauge on these things, even based on national polls. So we're going to watch that very closely, and we probably will not know the fate of the House unless there's some sort of wave or something surprising happens. Probably it could be a week or more before we know the fate of the U.S. House after Election Day.
From NPR, Ethel Kennedy, the widow of Senator Robert F. Kennedy, who raised their 11 children after he was assassinated and remained dedicated to social causes and the family's legacy for decades thereafter, died on Thursday, according to her family. She was 96 years old. Kennedy had been hospitalized after suffering a stroke in her sleep on October 3rd. The Kennedy matriarch, whose children include RFK Jr., was one of the last remaining members of a generation that included President John F. Kennedy. Her family said she had recently enjoyed seeing many of her relatives before falling ill. She was by Robert F. Kennedy's side when he was fatally shot in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles in June of 1968, just after winning the Democratic presidential primary in California.
Yeah, Ethel Kennedy, even by the time she was 40, had seen so much tragedy in her life. Of course, the assassination of her husband there as she was pregnant with their 11th child. She gives birth then just a couple months later. But her parents were killed in a plane crash in 1955 when she was very young. Her brother died in a crash in 1966. Her son, one of the 11 kids, died of a drug overdose. Another son died in a skiing accident. Her nephew, JFK Jr., died in a plane crash. There's so much tragedy in that Kennedy family. Also, one of her granddaughters died of a drug overdose in recent years as well. Nonetheless, Ethel persevered here. Was really remarkable, Jill, to just think about. Her husband was assassinated in 1968, and 50 years plus later, she was still pushing forward with his legacy. She founded the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights soon after his death. It advocated for a variety of causes, gun control, human rights, etc., in the decades since. And remarkably, she rarely spoke about her husband's assassination. Even 50 years later, her daughter, one of her daughters, Rory Kennedy, is a filmmaker. And they did a documentary on her back in 2012 on HBO called Ethel, where she said, listen, can we talk about what happened to my father? And Ethel in the documentary says, she begins with, well, when we lost Daddy, then she trails off, starts crying and says, please, let's talk about something else. So even in 2012 in this documentary, it's just, so much trauma there that she didn't want to discuss. If you're interested in learning more about her and the family, etc., it's worth watching that HBO documentary, Ethel.
From tennis.com, Rafael Nadal will officially retire from professional tennis following the 2024 Davis Cup finals in November. He revealed the news in a video posted to social media Thursday saying, the reality is that it has been some difficult years, these last 2 especially. I don't think I've been able to play without limitations. It is obviously a difficult decision, one that has taken me some time to make, but in this life, everything has a beginning and an end. And I think it's the appropriate time to put an end to a career that has been long and much more successful than I could have ever imagined. Nadal had suggested he would make 2024 his final season on tour, but had been reluctant to make any official announcement to this point.
So he turned professional, Jill, back in 2001 when he was just 14 years old. We should note Nadal, 38 years old now, but 2 decades in here. He's been a part of men's tennis as we've been watching this era as we've been watching this era of Federer, who retired a couple of years ago, Djokovic, who's still competing here and has made for very exciting and has made for some really exciting watching over the course of the past decades. The former world number one was most recently on the court at the Summer Olympic Games, where he played both in the singles as well as doubles. He said that he's very excited that his last tournament will be the final of the Davis Cup, representing his country, since one of his joys as a tennis player was back at the Davis Cup final in Sevilla back in 2004. A reminder here, Nadal, a 14-time champion over in the French Open, and has won a number of exciting matches through the years. Jill, I know you're a huge fan.
Huge fan. He's such a sweetheart. At least he appears to be such a sweetheart, at least, from what we could tell in his post-game interviews. And
Don't ruin it for us, Rafa.
And I love that you're really taking your Babbel lesson seriously with the Sevilla.
Sevilla. When he won the French Open, it was in Paris.
And finally, from The Hollywood Reporter, John Mulaney is returning to Netflix for a new live variety talk show. Netflix chief content officer announced the pickup Thursday, saying that the streaming service is hoping to build off John Mulaney Presents Everybody's in LA, the talk show concept that he hosted for the service earlier this year. The weekly show will launch in early 2025, with Mulaney also the executive producer and co-showrunner. Netflix says, we have a long relationship with John, and we have done the stand-up specials. And during Netflix's A Joke Festival this year, he did a live talk show called Everybody's in LA.
So live comedy has been a big thing for Netflix of late. They had that roast of Tom Brady. They had the comedy special from Chris Rock. From Joe Rogan. Netflix also adding live wrestling. They have the Christmas Day NFL programming. So live is back for streaming. Network television's known about that for a while. And now you have Netflix getting into the late night variety show at the same time that late night shows have not done so great for the networks. They're cutting back. They're cutting budgets. We've been talking about it here on this podcast. NBC nearly completely cut Seth Meyers, but they did cut his band. They've been cutting back on Friday nights.
It's just like Seth
just
by
chopping
himself.
Like soon it'll be by himself, no studio audience, and studio audience is free, so they're going to keep the audience probably.
And while we're talking about Netflix, I have to mention my new favorite show, Nobody Wants This, got renewed for a second season. Very excited.
Jill, we just watched it ourselves with Adam Brody and Kristen Bell, and I think that's a no-brainer for them to renew. It was very entertaining.
I've watched it probably like 3 times at this point because I just have it going in the back because I like the vibes. It's feel good. So I just have it. It's like mindless TV that I could just put on when I'm doing other things. I also love the casting is great with the mains, but also Timothy Simmons from Veep is in it. I love Jonah from Veep and also Justine Luke, who is in Succession. Is also like they're great. Their dynamic is great. So just like really great casting. And what's interesting is Erin Foster, the Foster sisters, who by the way are big fans of Mo News. They follow the Instagram account and repost, and so we're big among the Fosters. She, I think initially wanted to cast herself, and then eventually Netflix said, no, we're going to put Kristen Bell in that role. But she's a creator of this, and so congrats to them. Okay, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend. Time for what we are watching, reading, and eating. Mosh, what are you watching?
Like the opposite of Nobody Wants This. The Menendez brothers. There's both the documentary and the series. We've been talking about it here on the pod, and I need to refresh myself on the Menendez brothers because when that actually took place, I think I was in 1st or 2nd grade. So I'd like to get my refresh, especially as they scrutinize that case and may release them in the coming months here. Jill, what are you watching?
Okay, so I'll be watching Ali Wong's new stand-up. It's called Ali Wong Single Lady. It's on Netflix.
More comedy on Netflix.
Yeah, she is back and apparently ready to spill all the tea on dating life post-divorce and with kids. So I'm looking forward to that.
Did I catch her was her last comedy special when she was pregnant, or was that 2 comedy specials ago?
I think she did one in between. I think she did one post-pregnancy.
Got it.
Because she was talking all about being pregnant. I remember she's like, no one tells you the house comes out with the kid.
Oh, that's a while ago. I just checked that out. This goes back years. I think 2016. Wow. All right. I got a refresh on Ali Wong.
It was quite relatable as a new mom myself. And also frightening. I feel like maybe I was pregnant when I was watching it and I was like, oh my God, what is about to happen? I'm also going to be watching the Ohio State game. It's Ohio State versus Oregon. So number 2 versus number 3, Saturday night, 7:30. As my husband says, the biggest game of the year for Ohio State, minus, of course, the game against Michigan, which is
Speaking of your husband, by the way, he texted me this week. He goes, I think you guys need to really do X on the pod. Like, I forget the story. The CBS story we did yesterday. I go, that's a good thought. You know who's writing the podcast today? If you need her number, let me know. Her name is Jill.
You know what? He told me this. He said, he's like, I messaged Moshe because I wanted you guys to cover this story. And I was like, I'm like, what? Like, you messaged Moshe about a story? Like,
I'm always happy to take pictures from your husband, especially if it's like on the Instagram account or whatever. But I was like, I think you know someone who has an influence on the podcast, my friend.
But he's a good person, though. I run stories by him all the time because he's kind of like your everyday person. He's not so immersed in the news world. Like
right.
We
when
are.
Something hits Michael's radar, you're like, okay, this is what people are talking about.
And I thought, and I had mentioned it to him because I was curious if he was interested in the story as somebody, you know, we both worked for CBS News. So we were like we're
media
super
people. We know the
it.
personalities. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mentioned it to him and he was very, very interested. So once he told me that he had messaged you, I was like, oh my God, I'm definitely.
Well, I just want to make sure.
Podcast.
So like, that moving forward, listen, Michael, I am open ears to all your pitches. And like, I think that, you know, if you really want to put a story over the edge, you not only tell Jill about it, you tell me about it. We will make sure to get it in.
Then it's 100% going to happen.
It's 100% because it's rare. He doesn't use his asks very often. So
no,
he has points saved up on the board. Yeah.
He's not one of these who's messaging you like every day at 10 a.m. after he listens to the podcast. Right, I'm like,
talk about it. Michael has a pitch. What's new? No, it's very rare that he is like, you got to do this.
Okay, Moshe, what are you reading?
So some of you might be familiar with Yuval Noah Harari. He's a award-winning author, bestseller. You might have read *Sapiens* in the past. He's out with a new book called *Nexus: The History of Information Networks, How We Communicate with Each Other, going back thousands of years. I love his comprehensive history of human history. So I'm actually trying to pitch him. We're trying to get him on the Mo News interview podcast. But it's *Nexus: A Brief History of Information Networks from the Stone Age to AI. So, you know, serious but interesting. Nonetheless, so looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to the podcast about it.
You're like, I'd like that summarized for me in about a 45-minute conversation.
Perfect.
Jill, speaking of concise ways to consume, I see you got an article this week, not a book.
I do. I'm going to be reading this article that caught my eye in The Atlantic. It is called "The Type of Love That Makes People Happiest When It Comes to Lasting Romance. Passion apparently has nothing on friendship." So I will be.
I feel like I've heard this before. Friends are the most important thing.
It's funny that that's how you took it. I thought it meant find a mate who's really like a friend.
That's also important too. Yeah.
Well, I will read it and report back.
Well, I think we're both very lucky to call our spouses our friends.
Very true. Okay, Moshe, what are you eating?
Jill, starting at sunset tonight, I will be eating nothing until sunset tomorrow night. But then I look forward to breaking the fast. One place, as we've moved here to the Upper East Side neighborhood of Manhattan that we're loving, also a fan of the Mo News podcast, the Mo News interview feed. Isle of Us is the name of the coffee house restaurant. The guy who runs it is incidentally named Lyle of Isle of Us. So I want to give them a shout out. Great coffee, great meals there. Okay,
well, we love to support a supporter of Mo News, so that's great. And Moshe, I will be eating my favorite thing ever, bagels, lox, and cream cheese. And really my favorite thing is whitefish. So I cannot wait for that.
Interesting. You're a whitefish. I'm not a whitefish person. I don't know if everyone's familiar with this. There's whitefish salad. Some people are into it. My wife's into it. I am not a whitefish person. I do like lox. I do like salmon. I'm a tuna person. I'm a chicken salad person. I can't get into the whitefish.
Give it a shot. It's never
I've
too
tried.
late.
I'm like 4 decades into life here, and I cannot get into it. So I'm giving up. I'm happy with I try a lot of foods. Whitefish salad, not for me. So enjoy all of it this weekend, Jill.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Review us in the App Store. An easy fast to everyone who is fasting. And for everyone else, enjoy eating like a regular weekend.
Enjoy your regularly scheduled meal as we atone for our sins. We'll be back fresh and so clean on Monday, Jill.
Yes. Hopefully written into the book of life for another year.
There we go.
All right. Bye, everyone.